So Nvidia did just announce that the RTX 5070 will only cost $549 and have RTX 4090 performance. But we really need to talk about this because that RTX 4090 performance, what he doesn't mention in the keynote, well, he says it's only possible with the power of AI. But what does that really mean? What he's really referring to is multi-frame generation. So this is similar to how when Nvidia launched their 40 series with frame generation, they were making massive performance claims compared to the previous generation. Claims like the RTX 4070 was as fast as a 3090 or faster than a 3090. And that was only true if you compare a card using frame generation to card not using frame generation. So that's one of the big things we need to talk about here, is there's some big claims here. Overall, the prices aren't as bad as some people had feared. The 5080 did indeed match the 4080 Super pricing at $999 instead of the 4080 original pricing of $1,200, and some people had feared it would be even more than $1,200. And the 5090 is certainly a price increase compared to the 4090, but it is at least staying, technically under $2,000. And a lot of people had feared it would be, as much as $2,500 or so. So anyway, I would have liked if the 5090 wasn't any more expensive than the 4090. I do like that the 5080 is not any more expensive than the 4080. And the 5070 Ti actually coming in a bit lower than the 4070 Ti by $50, coming in at $749, and the 5070 coming in at $549. But again, we get these big performance claims like the 5070 being faster than a 4090. So why don't we start by putting that to bed a little bit, although I should probably mention the release date. While this says availability starting January, if you read into the more details that were available after the keynote on Nvidia's website, the 5090 and 5080 will both be available on January 30th. And then they didn't give a specific date for the 5070 Ti or the 5070, but they did say January. February. Anyway, so what do I mean here with the performance numbers? So if you go beyond the keynote presentation, which was mostly about AI past that point, I did watch the whole thing, on NVIDIA's website, and I'll link all my sources in the video description, there's a lot more information. So when they say claims like the 5090 is 2 times faster than the 4090, they're talking about when using DLSS4 multi-frame generation compared to the 4090, which will only be capable of normal frame generation. And that's where you get these massive performance differences. There are some performance slides that we can take a look at here, but maybe we'll dig a little bit more into the actual specs of these systems as well. So the 4090, as rumored, is a 32 gigabyte graphics card with GDDR7 memory, over 21,000 CUDA cores. It's honestly looks like quite a bit of a performance monster. They are claiming that their new ray tracing cores are 2 times faster at ray intersection calculations compared to the previous generation cores, all sorts of big claims. And then we get a performance chart, which, let's full screen this for a second here. But the big thing is this footnote. So in other words, this is how they're backing up their claims of the 5090 being twice as fast as a 4090. But when you read the footnote down here, this is the big deal. They're saying that this is at 4K max settings using DLSS super resolution set to performance mode and DLSS ray reconstruction on, and that's on both the 40 series and 50 series cards. The 40 series cards support frame generation, like you got with DLSS 3, but there is now MFG, which is multi-frame generation, set to its 4X mode on the 50 series cards, and this is paired up with the 9800X 3D. However, in the specific game Plague Tale Requiem, they say it only supports DLSS 3, not DLSS 4. And that means that this performance right here is an actual like-for-like comparison, whereas these other ones are not like-for-like comparisons. Now, I don't want to discount the fact that it's possible that multi-frame generation is going to be awesome, and that will be supported on the 50 series and not the 40 series. But not every game will have that, so if you're talking about the raw rendering performance of the 5090, it's not 2 times the performance of the 4090. That's only in the specific use case of using multi-frame generation in its 4x mode. And I'll talk more about DLSS4 and multi-frame generation a little bit later in this video. But first, let's get into what that means. So if we're not using DLSS4 versus DLSS3, if we're looking at DLSS3 versus DLSS3, we get this. Now, this scaling is not frame rate, it's performance scaling as a multiplier. So if they matched, it would be a 1x scale, right? If it's up here, that's double the performance. That would be your 2x scale. And notice that they're showing when they compare DLSS4 multi-frame generation compared to DLSS3, not multi-frame generation on the 4090, that's where they're getting that performance. However, here, we're, I would say, below 1.5, it looks like. So in the game that we have a like-for-like comparison in, we are seeing the 5090 actually looking like it's less than 50% faster than the 4090. Now, that's a one-game sample, so it's very possible that in other games, you would see a bigger advantage for the 5090, even in a like-for-like comparison. Or in other games, maybe you'll see a smaller one. So that's why it's really important to read these first-party benchmark graphs, read your footnotes, make sure you understand what you're looking at, because that's where all of these marketing claims are relied on for those giant taglines. The 5070, 4090 performance at 549, when the 5070 is using multi-frame generation and the 4090 is not. Make sense? Let's go ahead and continue our look at the 50 series as we go along here. So, again, that 5090 is January 30th, starting at $2,000. The Founders Edition design also looks to be quite nice, similar aesthetics to what we saw previously, with other series, but with some changes. I'm not getting a huge amount of the details on the cooler model and all that, but there's a look at the Founders Edition. I always like Nvidia's Founders Edition designs. I think they look very professional and sleek. Now we have the 5080. The 5080 is being claimed to be twice as fast as the 4080. But again, that's when you're using DLSS4 multi-frame generation compared to the 4080 just using normal DLSS3 frame generation, not the multi-frame generation mode. So again, when we pull up this same chart, we have the same caveat, where if you look at a Plague Tale Requiem, where it's only supporting DLSS3, so you're actually getting a like-for-like comparison, well, then the performance scaling, again, seems to be definitely less than 1.5. Now, what exactly is it? Do I know if this is perfectly to scale? You could count pixels or something, but it's a one game sample anyway. Also, on another note with this one game sample, this is also, again, max settings. That's probably including ray tracing and things like that. And sometimes ray tracing performance between architecture generations scales differently than non-RT performance. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Again, the RT cores apparently having, 2 times the, or at least up to 2 times the ray intersection calculations, things like that. So anyway, just more things to keep in mind. So again, keep your expectations a lot more grounded. It's not actually twice as fast as a 4080 unless you're using multi-frame generation versus non-multi-frame generation. Now, the overall specs do look to be what we expected based on leaks. It is coming in with 16 gigabytes of GDDR7 memory, and that does give it a memory bandwidth increase of 34% compared to the RTX 4080. And again, it does look specs to be cut down significantly from the 5090, all of that. Anyway, again, this one's coming out January 30th, as well as the 5090, so they do have the same availability date, and this one coming in at $999. So, while that's certainly still incredibly expensive, at least it's lining up, like I said, with like that 4080 Super pricing versus the original $1,200 4080, and they didn't increase it again or anything like that. Now, we have the RTX 5070 Ti, where the big headline-grabbing claim is that it's twice as fast, 2 times faster than the RTX 4070 Ti. But again, I'm going to sound like the broken record now. That's, again, only if you are counting a multi-frame generation versus not multi-frame generation. It's not twice as fast in a like-for-like apples-to-apples comparison. Now, it is, as rumored, a 16 gigabyte card with GDDR7 memory. And its price is coming in at $749 and will be available in February. Now, So the pricing there means that at $250 less than the 5080 and giving you the 16 gigabytes of VRAM, this would be kind of your entry point for somebody who wants the Nvidia feature set. They want to get the 50 series, but they also want 16 gigabytes of VRAM. But you don't want to spend $1,000. $750 is still a lot of money, but again, depending on how it all ends up benchmarking out, we'll have to see how that works out. Now, when we're talking about the 5070 Ti, we are now looking at 1440p benchmarks as opposed to 4K benchmarks that we were looking at previously. Also notice that the DLSS super resolution is now set to quality as opposed to performance. It's once again using ray reconstruction on both the 40 and 50 series, frame generation on 40 series, and multi-frame generation in its 4X mode on the 50 series. Again, we do have the Plague Tale Requiem only supporting DLSS 3, which is giving us more of a like-to-like comparison. And again, once again, it looks like, I would say actually less than 50% faster as opposed to 2 times faster if we're going off of that scaling. But again, that's a one game sample. But I would say if you're looking for those apples to apples comparisons, that's what you get. So again, the 40 series won't have access to that multi-frame generation. So, it is highlighting something it can do that the 40 series can't, but it's not the same thing as just having that much raw power. And again, okay, there's that big headline, the 5070, twice as fast as the 4070, or as they phrased it in the big keynote, 5070, 4090 levels of performance. Once again, yeah, if you're using the multi-frame generation versus not. Now, the card is 12 gigabytes of VRAM. So while I do like that, again, the price point is lower than the original price of the 4070, which originally came in at $599. This is coming in at $549, which was the lowered MSRP of the 4070 after the 4070 Super launched at $599, and they reduced the MSRP of the 4070. So this is now matching that reduced price of the 4070. So that does mean that any performance increase you do get over the 4070 is generational improvement, which is, again, nice. So I like that they didn't go completely like into crazy land on their pricing schemes. But again, I would have really liked to have seen 16 gigabytes of VRAM on the 5070. We don't get that. It's 12. 12's not a disaster, but it's also kind of that kind of borderline edge case in certain games. So depending on how long you hang on to this GPU, games can use more VRAM. Nvidia did talk about some technology to try to reduce VRAM usage. I'll talk about that more a little bit later in the video. But anyway, once again, let's pop into these performance claims. Once again, we're at 1440p using DLSS quality with ray reconstruction. But again, multi-frame generation on the 5070 and just normal frame generation on the 4070. So here, if we look at that Plague Tale Requiem, which just has a like-for-like comparison of DLSS 3, that's where we are seeing, once again, it's actually less than a 50% performance boost, as opposed to the 2 times faster, 2 times as fast that they are wanting to claim on their headline here, okay? So it's definitely not actually in raw power twice as fast as a 4070 or as fast as a 4090. But it has some new features, and it will be faster than a 4070 without increasing the MSRP. So certainly could have been worse. Also talked about 50 series laptops coming in March. I don't really focus on laptops on my channel. All my sources will be in the video description, so feel free to take a look at that. But DLSS 4 and Reflex 2. Let's talk about these. These are some of the big things, and you will be getting some improvements on your non-50 series cards. So let's get that out of the way here for a second. So maybe let's actually pop in, I think if I go further down, there's a slide that gets right to the point on which GPUs support what. Here we go. So there's a lot of DLSS features now, and the one that is exclusive to the 50 series is DLSS multi-frame generation. Only the 50 series is going to support that, and basically it does what it sounds like. Instead of just generating one frame between two actually traditionally rendered frames, it can support multiple frame generations up to, I believe, 3 extras, which I think they're calling 4X mode, unless I'm misunderstanding that. I'll show you more of their slides in a second here. However, they are saying that even the normal frame generation, which the 40 series supports, but not the 30 or 20 series, is being enhanced. And those enhancements will come to the 40 series, not just the 50 series. They're saying that they can reduce its memory usage, and that was one of the problems with DLSS frame generation on the 40 series, on those VRAM-starved cards. If they're already right at their VRAM limit, and then you kick on frame generation, sometimes you either don't get a performance boost or performance actually gets worse because you're going over your VRAM budget. So they're advertising a reduced memory usage for this new frame generation technique and increased performance. And they're claiming that that's happening because it sounds like the optical flow is being done through AI as opposed to the hardware optical flow acceleration is kind of how I'm understanding it. We'll go over some more slides for that in a minute here, but this is kind of a good summary. We are getting enhanced DLSS ray reconstruction, claiming increased stability and lighting detail with ray tracing, and that is coming to every single RTX GPU. So 20 series, 30 series, 40 series, and 50 series will all have enhanced DLSS ray reconstruction. Now, the super resolution technology is also being enhanced, and it's claiming improved stability and higher detail in motion, but it's currently in beta. And that is again coming to all RTX cards, so 20, 30, 40, and 50 series. They're also claiming that that would enhance the DLAA, so when you're running at native resolution and using the DLAA, the model basically to do anti-aliasing as opposed to upscaling. They're also again claiming improved stability and higher detail in motion for that, and again that's in beta. Now, what games are going to get these upgrades? Well, that's kind of the cool thing, because while they're claiming 75 games and apps will have support for the newest DLSS model, they're saying that through the Nvidia app, you can actually force games to run the newer models for super resolution and ray reconstruction. And I think even the multi-frame generation. And they're showing that that's basically done through the Nvidia app. So if you have the Nvidia app, you can override the DLSS settings in the actual game, and then you can tell it to which frame generation mode you want to use, which DLSS version you want to use. And again, I think it's that enhanced version that they're talking about. So that's really cool. Again, I think it'll help accelerate the adoption rate, because if the game developers don't go back and add in the newer model, letting you force the override on the older implementation within the Nvidia app sounds really cool. That sounds great. Now, the other big announcement is Nvidia Reflex 2. And I'll talk about that quickly before we dive into a little more in depth with the new multi-frame generation, all of that. So Nvidia Reflex 2 is offering frame warp technology. Now, this sounds like less of a straight up latency reduction than what Reflex traditionally is. So maybe let's talk about this for a second. Okay, so basically what Reflex has traditionally done is offer better synchronization between, because normally, you have your mouse movement, goes through your CPU, there's the render queue, there's the GPU, things go to display, and then Reflex can optimize that latency pipeline to better synchronize all of that for reducing latency. And it doesn't really change so much about how the game actually renders things. However, the Reflex 2 is offering an actual space warp, which is interesting. So what this does is you move your mouse and then you go into your normal rendering pipeline. However, before you actually display the frame, they're going to look to the latest mouse movement, because you've continued moving your mouse while this frame rendering process is happening and before it gets to your display. So right before the image is actually displayed, they then get the latest mouse position. And so they figure out maybe you've moved to the right a little bit. So what they then do is they warp the image to account for where your mouse will be, even though the actual rendered frame wasn't ready for that. Now, what they admit then is that that causes some problems because the actual image that was rendered is different than what you get after this warp, including the fact that, like, for example, in this scene, if you've moved your mouse further to this side, there's now missing information right here. There's nothing there, right? As well as some things that, that would be behind maybe your target. Now, what they're saying is they then take data from prior frames and color data and depth data and use that to in-paint what the basically AI model is deciding should be there, okay? Now, I'm a little bit curious about that because, for example, they're showing like actual railing and things like that here, that it seems like the game would have no idea that was there. So I don't know how it's like deciding that's there, but it apparently does. And then it fills those gaps in so things don't look weird. But it seems like the screen, the actual image on your display, is adapting more quickly to your actual mouse movements, which theoretically should help with, like, in a competitive game, tracking your target with your aim and things like that. Now, I wonder what happens if an enemy pops in off screen right here, right? What if an enemy actually is popping in? I don't think you're gonna see that enemy any sooner than if you weren't using this. So I don't think it totally reduces, I don't think it totally lets you see things actually happen sooner, but it does move everything in relation to your mouse sooner, which I think gives you some advantages to tracking. But again, potentially the edges of the screen might be lying to you a little bit about what's actually going on there. They do show this in motion in some videos here. I think they just have a short display of it. Is it this one? Yeah, here we go. So this is showing in painting on versus in painting off. Why are we? Oh yeah, it's just a super short video. So do you guys see what's happening? It's not popping up recommended videos. Geez. Okay, so as we were seeing this, when you watch on this left-hand side, you're showing it with the in-painting turned off, and then on the right with the in-painting turned on, where it is predicting what's happening in those places that it's kind of warped out of the way, which is pretty interesting. Let's play this again. It's just a little 6-second clip, so you can kind of get the idea. So the in-painting is required to make things not look just totally weird and flickery, and having gaps at the edges of the screens. But again, I do wonder about if you're getting misfed some information from the edges of the screens that are being uncovered, like if an enemy's popping in. I mean, you'll still see them in the next frame as it's actually rendered, but anyway, so that's interesting. They're saying that it's coming to a couple of games soon. I think they mentioned a few competitive titles like Valorant, for example, and I think the finals. Did they say anything about any other games? It says it's coming to the finals in Valorant and will debut first on 50 series GPUs, but with support added for other GeForce RTX GPUs in a future update. So, interesting. So this is another thing that will be coming to other RTX GPUs, not just the 50 series, although it will be in the 50 series first. And again, looks like the game rollout will be pretty small at first, but then coming to more games after that. Now, let's double back around to this DLSS multi-frame generation stuff, okay? So they've got a massive article about this. So again, I will link all my sources in the video description and feel free to read all the details. They have some video explainers as well. But let's talk a little bit about multi-frame generation and the other DLSS improvements. So they show, again, a super short little clip here. This is 7 seconds of DLSS off versus DLSS 2, that's just super resolution. And then DLSS 3.5, that's using frame generation as well as ray reconstruction. And then DLSS 4 on the right, which has multi-frame generation. And they've got their frame rates up in the top, top corners here. And you can see that it is claiming to be quite a significant upgrade. There, I realized I had to resize my screen to actually see the frame rates. So we can play this for a second. I don't think you can really see anything in this little barely moving 7-second clip, right? Other than the frame rates they're claiming. So there's not a lot to really get out of the video footage as far as I can tell, but there it is. Anyway, But what exactly is it doing? Well, basically, it seems like the main difference is that it is just generating more frames. So you generate more frames in between the traditionally rendered frames. So previously with DLSS 3 frame generation, we had this. You render a frame, and then it kind of uses some data from that frame and the frame after it to generate a frame in between using optical flow accelerators, and that was exclusive to the 40 series. So what they're saying now is that DLSS4 multi-frame generation, first of all, notice that they're saying it's an AI-based optical flow as opposed to a hardware-based optical flow accelerator. So that's definitely a difference here. Also, they're saying that you can generate multiple frames, and it seems like there's some options to how many frames it's generating, considering that there seem to be other setting modes. But it looks like, at least in this image, they're showing up to 3 generated frames. So you render 1 frame, generate 3 in between before it displays the next traditionally rendered frame. And again, using an AI-based optical flow acceleration, and they're also saying they've improved the model for even the single frame generation using an AI-based optical flow as well. So there's that. They say the new frame generation AI model is 40% faster and uses 30% less VRAM compared to the other model. And again, that will be an improvement that should be available for the 40 series as well as the 50 series. But the 50 series will be the only one that will be able to generate the additional frames. If you continue to read this, they also talk about their frame pacing is done differently based on some improvements to the hardware and pipeline on the 50 series. I don't think I need to get into the weeds on how that's done, but basically they're claiming better frame pacing with that. Now, so this is where basically NVIDIA's kind of end goal is they're saying that, so if you're really kicking all of this on, so if you're using, let's say, DLSS performance mode, maybe you're outputting a 4K image, maybe you're only actually rendering it at 1080p, here's your traditional rendering 1080p, and then using your super resolution and ray reconstruction to output a 4K image, but then you're using your frame generation to generate the next 3 images off of that. So that's where they're claiming that, so really, out of these frames, 15 of every 16 pixels are actually generated by AI. Now, so that is interesting, and I hope this works really well. If it ends up working really well, feeling great, and looking great, then awesome. But I really want to try this out and see how it goes. Also, same caveat as with normal frame generation, because these aren't responsive to your inputs, this isn't increasing the responsiveness of the game in the same way that actually rendering more traditional frames would. So that's that other kind of caveat where you're comparing frame rates. It's not really quite the same thing. And you might be like, say, oh, but then Reflex 2 is going to then solve some of that latency issue. Well, again, first of all, that seems like it has pretty limited game support, and second of all, it has the like I said, some of the AI fill stuff on the edges. I see that as being necessary. This could be a cool technology, but again, I just want to be clear that I am excited about a lot of this, and I think a lot of this is really cool, and I hope it works super well. But also, when we're reading all of this marketing first-party information, just remember that they're presenting everything in the best light possible, and that's important. Now, as far as some performance numbers go, they're giving us some more scaling here, where we are seeing 4K 240 hertz gaming with the RTX 5090 and DLSS4, up to 8 times performance with DLSS4. So they're comparing DLSS off versus DLSS 3 versus DLSS 4. So basically, how much faster is, faster, again, I'm not even sure if faster is the right word, right? How many more frames per second are we getting, not increasing the responsiveness of the game, right? Compared to DLSS 3. Well, they're claiming that it's up to a 1.7x, or in other words, like 70% more frames will be on your display when compared with DLSS 3. Now, what about the latency, the frame generation latency and all of that? Well, if we do go back to that quick video that we had, which was showing the side-by-sides, it didn't look like it was adding much additional latency compared to just using DLSS 3 frame generation. I can't find the side-by-side anymore, whatever. But anyway, it did seem like, while DLSS 3 could introduce latency, I'm not sure that DLSS 4 introduces much more latency, because you're just inserting more frames in between your two traditionally rendered frames. So maybe there could be a little bit more of a hit, but I don't think it's going to be too much more. So this does seem like if you're already going to be generating frames, as long as these look good, it is just going to get you even more frames on your screen, which sounds good, and they're claiming it's an even better model. Now, speaking of a better model, here's a little bit more about that, because not just a better model for frame generation, but also just for their DLSS super resolution technology. DLSS 2, if you want to call it that, even though the numbering schemes have still gone beyond that. So they're claiming an updated model. They're going beyond CNNs, convolutional neural networks, and saying that they're now moving to a transformer model, which has 2 times the parameters and takes 4 times the compute, but is able to then deliver better image quality using that. And they do provide some evidence for this. So if you look at a few of these videos, you can see that the fencing does appear to be much more stable, and things like that tend to be an issue. The fan here is showing less ghosting, which again, ghosting tends to be an issue on on super resolution technologies. These examples coming from Alan Wake 2. Much more stability on those fine, high contrast details like those power lines against the white background. Again, showing much more temporal stability. Those are some examples in Alan Wake 2. They're showing some examples in Horizon Forbidden West Complete Edition, where they're showing that it's able to reconstruct just more detail on things like this backpack. So the evidence they're showing here does seem to support this new transformer-based model as actually being a significant improvement. Now, are they going to show us examples where it's worse? No. Are there going to be examples where it's worse? Maybe not. But again, keep in mind this is all first-party data that we're going over, not independent third-party testing. So just always keep that in the back of your mind, and I'll try to keep reminding you when we go over all of this stuff. But at the same time, DLSS is already really good. If this is noticeably better, I mean, you could definitely be getting to the point where just like turning on DLSS is kind of a no-brainer if it really looks this great. And again, I kind of worry about, it looks like, AMD's talking about their FSR AI-based upscaler, but is that going to compete with the previous version of DLSS we had? And then even if it does it compete well with this new transformer-based model? Nvidia does seem to keep pushing the bar on all of this. So, yeah, that's where we're at with all of this. Again, there is some more details you could read into. 75 games and apps with multi-frame generation on day 0. And again, the big summary on all of those features was the only thing that's locked down to the new 50 series is the multi-frame generation. The 40 and 50 series both get the improved frame generation model, although the 40 series doesn't get multi-frame generation on it. They all get, all RTX cards, 20, 30, and 40 series are getting the improved ray reconstruction, super resolution, and DLAA. So pretty cool stuff. That's what we've got for you today. Overall, I'm pretty happy with this announcement. The pricing certainly could have been worse. The only thing I'm kind of bummed out about is the 5070 having 12 gigabytes of VRAM. Other than that, I mean, would I have liked the prices to be even lower? Sure, I'd like them to be free. Come on, Nvidia, just give everyone a free 5090, right? So is there more I could have asked for? Absolutely. But I think that none of this is crazy awful pricing, especially compared to what we might have expected and what we saw with the 40 series. It does seem to be offering real performance improvements, even if I don't like the marketing claims like this one, which I feel like is extremely misleading based on the multi-frame generation. I mean, your 4090 could use, lossless scaling, 3x frame generation mode or something like that, right? Like it's not real raw performance. So that's my only big complaint with the announcement today is I don't like these big dramatic and misleading claims. I wish they kept it a little more grounded in reality. And I wish that they were giving us some performance charts that were a little more apples to apples. But at least we were able to get one apples to apples comparison out of the charts to kind of bring things a little bit back to reality. But that's what we've got for you today. I'm also happy for the fact that even previous generation owners will be getting some upgrades. And I think it's really cool that it's available through the app to like kind of force those upgrades into games that maybe don't have that support. It sounds like it's not going to be every single game will support it. Like the Nvidia app will add support for more games, overriding it once Nvidia's done some internal testing to make sure they work right. And again, Reflex 2, this warp thing, I'm kind of excited to play around with it and see how it feels in person. It sounds cool, but I'm also a little nervous about that AI-based filling that it's talking about. But anyway, overall, very happy with the announcement. I'll definitely make more videos as we get more details available and, reviews. If these 5080, 5090 come out on January 30th, then we should expect reviews at least by that 30th, if not before. So there we go. I hope all of you have an excellent day.